The World Economic Forum WEF 2025. How can Malaysia utilize its participation to drive economic growth and foster international collaboration? Key engagements with global leaders and corporations. How do they align with Malaysia's goals of attracting high-value investments? And in what ways can Malaysia position itself to advance digital transformation and integrate sustainability into its economic framework based on discussions at the forum? This is Money Matters. Hello and good evening. You're tuned into TV3's when you can also stream on Tonton. I'm Zahir Kelvinong Abdullah, and today we'll dive into game-changing opportunities that Malaysia seized at the World Economic Forum WEF 2025 and how is the nation positioning itself in the global economic landscape. Joining us today is the Institute of Strategic and International Studies, ISIS Malaysia Chairman, Datuk Prof. Dr. Mohd Faiz Abdullah. Professor, thank you for joining us on Money Matters.
Thank you for having me, Kelvin.
Pleasure to have you with us. Now, can I start off by asking you the Madani agenda at WEF? How did Malaysia's participation at WEF reflect the Madani government's broader economic agenda? And what were the key messages conveyed here?
Thank you. I think first and foremost, what has got to be emphasized is that Prime Minister Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim basically showcased Malaysia's Madani Malaysia. The entire philosophy throughout the various remarks and statements that he made by emphasizing, highlighting a value-based economy. In other words, while going for economic prosperity and capitalism, it should not be unbridled capitalism. It will be capitalism with values, with a strong social agenda, basically encapsulating the general philosophy of the Madani Malaysia. Now, on top of that, what you have is that classic situation where he had this very important strategic one-on-one dialogue with the convener, the founder himself, Klaus Schwab. That was clearly emphasized. And among other things, the Prime Minister outlined some of the basic things that we're going for, in line with the theme, Malaysia chairing ASEAN for 2025, along the theme of inclusivity and sustainability. So some of the key messages were basically within that fabric, that we will go for development which is sustainable, not just going for low-hanging fruits, but going for the long shot to see how things are. At the same time, making sure that the agenda always includes the less fortunate, the marginalized, not just within societies in a member state, but between member states of ASEAN as well. So this entire basic projection was brought into the dialogue and narrative and conversations that we had at the World Economic Forum.
Right. Now, moving on to the role in global transformation. Now, what role does Malaysia envision playing in global economic transformation, particularly, of course, in digital innovation and sustainable development based on the discussions at WEF?
Yes. Among the actual very well-curated discussions, this, featured very, very highly in relation to Malaysia chairing ASEAN and how does that project itself into the question of global transformation. Now, Malaysia's agenda is very clear. The digital transformation will be one of the key top priorities of how we want to move the needle in terms of technological advancement. So what was being shown was not just rhetoric about us wanting to do it, but we're actually doing it. Example, we are already making it clear that we are building the good infrastructure and digital ecosystem that would attract foreign direct investments. You have Microsoft, Google, and in terms of artificial intelligence, even NVIDIA, apart from the data centers that we're talking about. These are clear indications that the foundation has been laid, and now it's about adding actual value to this digital transformation. And by chairing ASEAN for 2025, we are setting the example that it will also spill over in relation to the region as a bloc itself. That will impact and contribute towards the global transformation.
So were there any specific partnerships or collaborations forged at WEF that will accelerate Malaysia's economic growth and international positioning?
They already have been, even before WEF. Like I said, those key partnerships in relation to the digital transformation era, in relation to what we call the DCIs, the data center investments, in relation to some specific areas pursuant to, for example, the energy transition issues, like the APG, we call it the ASEAN energy grid. The whole area has been, but specific ones, offhand there'll be a few, which I may not be at this point privy to be talking about it, unless it's really out in the open. But over and above that, there were very specific one-on-one business meetings with corporations, huge ones,
Which brings us to my next question as well, because obviously not just global leaders the Prime Minister met, because business leaders, can I read from here, from 6 multinational companies, including AstraZeneca, DP World, Medtronic, Nestle and Google. So the importance of meeting these MNCs was very important for us.
Certainly, some of them were new meetings, some of them were follow-up meetings as well. Because policies have been made, decisions have been made, the crucial thing is actual implementation. As for some of the names that you've mentioned, basically we are looking at a very forward-looking timeline on how to implement those policies.
Right. So now looking at the impact of bilateral meetings, so in what ways did Prime Minister Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim's bilateral meetings with global leaders at WEF influence Malaysia's future economic strategy and of course global relationships?
Yes, well, fortunately I was privy to those bilateral meetings. Some of it is already out in the public sphere. By nature, we wouldn't want to disclose too much details in terms of bilaterals unless they're already out in the open. I can tell you, for one, the meeting with the Netherlands Prime Minister was very productive. It's productive in 2 ways, because as you know, Netherlands itself, politically, there have been some concerns about it moving a little bit to the far right. And on account of that, it was very good that, our positions were made clear. Also, we do share very, and most unfortunately, the airline's tragedy. In many ways, it helps to bring understanding much better there. And don't forget, the Netherlands is a key player in the semiconductor business. And that also represents one of the major FDI contributors to Malaysia. So it was a good meeting between 2 prime ministers to understand each other at a more personal level, and that would solve the initial problem about building of trust and confidence in each other. That's one. The South, the Global South agenda was also pursued, obviously, and among others, the Prime Minister met with Somalia, and there were specific talks on how to advance aid in various sectors, including education, including the infrastructure economy, and so on. And likewise with the Libyan Prime Minister. In the case of Somalia, it was the President, and Libya was the Prime Minister. In fact, talks about reopening, in the embassy, Tripoli. So these are very positive signs that move towards the upward trajectory of bilateral relations.
Yes. Professor, just hold that thought. We've just got to go for a very quick break. We're talking to the chairman of ISIS, Datuk Professor Dr. Mohd Faiz Abdullah. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Institute of Strategic and International Studies, ISIS Malaysia Chairman, Datuk Professor Dr. Mohd Faiz Abdullah is with me right here in the studios. Now, Professor, leading on to where we left just now, can we move on to green economy? How is Malaysia planning to integrate green technology and sustainability into its economy? And how were these topics discussed at WEF?
It's certainly a very hot topic. I think to begin with, it has to be emphasized that there was the Paris Agreement, and PM made it clear that in spite of the shifting dynamics in relation to Paris Agreement, you know what I'm talking about, Trump, basically saying goodbye to the Paris Agreement. Notwithstanding that, we remain steadfastly committed towards all the relevant things that are in the Paris Agreement. So among other things, of course, apart from value-based commitment, is also in relation to the SDGs that Malaysia is committed to. And what happened is that Prime Minister showcased, like I said at the very outset, the Madani-based philosophy of how we will integrate a balance between environmentally sustainable efforts at development and at the same time the economy, which has to be balanced according to the needs of the people, so that the general population, and particularly those that will be affected, will not be adversely affected as well. Among other things, there was this emphasis on the APG, which is the ASEAN power grid. That is a key area in order to lay the groundwork for ASEAN to be the energy hub for the region. And that is one of the key areas that Malaysia will particularly be pushing as we take the chair for ASEAN 2025. So those things continue to remain to be top on the list.
Adding on to that, because the Prime Minister also mentioned in one of his speeches about the Myanmar situation as well. So is this a stumbling block into what the region plans to do, basically, especially with the ASEAN grid?
Yep. It is a problem, but not necessarily a insurmountable stumbling block. Yeah, because you talk about inclusivity and sustainability. The problem with Myanmar is that it has been an intractable situation so far over the last few years, in spite of the 5-point consensus, which was supposed to be a classic show of ASEAN centrality. Yeah, these were point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4, point 5. And from day one, the military authorities have been thumping their noses against even point 1, which is stop violence against their own civilians. Now, as chair, the responsibility and expectations are great for Malaysia to at least move the needle towards some sort of a positive resolution. And among other things, that would require engagement of all parties, even including the junta, without giving the impression that we are sanctioning military rule. So that will be one of the key challenges. So like you say, it is a problem, but it's not insurmountable.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, can we move on to attracting foreign investments in Malaysia? Now, what specific opportunities did Malaysia explore at WEF to attract foreign investments, and how can these define the nation's global competitiveness?
Very good. You mentioned earlier, in fact, when we said what were some of the earlier things that I talk about values-based, one of the first things is that Malaysia has proven to be on the correct trajectory for economic reforms, fundamental financial reforms, fiscal reforms. Yeah, that would also include the fact that we have gone for subsidy rationalization, which sometimes could be misinterpreted as, making life even more difficult, which is not true at all. So what happens is that you now have a situation where monies are properly saved, and that could dial down to benefit the lower income group, where in that way, it's not basically about robbing the rich to feed the poor. It's about fair, equitable distribution and incurring of costs so that the marginalized and the poorer could benefit more. That's number one. Number two, mentioned earlier, a situation of good business dealings, good policies, and on top of it all, political stability. That was showcased as one of the key elements in relation to making Malaysia why it should be, as they say, a favorite place or the preferred choice for investment.
Okay,
Yes.
so looking at the boosting high-tech growth in terms of what you mentioned just now. So how can Malaysia ensure that the momentum from WEF leads to tangible growth in high-tech industries and, of course, talent development in the country?
Get on with it, as I say, the business. All the decisions are made. How are we going to be implementing it? Some of the key things would be, of course, immediately there should be at various levels committees for implementation, not committees for planning. Implementation would mean very specific timelines, very, very high KPIs to ensure that those things that are already made for will be implemented, as investors who want to see things happen. Among top of the things would be fast-track approvals of things that should be approved, getting on with how things are going to be monitored. Those are some of the key things to get it going. So, because, as you say, to get the momentum on. While that is happening, not to lose focus on what would be the key deliverables. Like we said, energy transition, climate change objectives, net zero, targets in relation by 2050 and following the timeline. All those things will come into play. Now, while that is going on, we mustn't forget that basic business, for the man in the street will have to be attended to. So that would include to show how we are dealing with cost of living, how are we dealing with issues, bread and butter, well, maybe roti chana issues, yeah. For example, food on the table, cost of living, food security, all those will come in a package to show that Malaysia, as a prime example of a gateway for investments for greater prosperity for all. That will be part of the catching on to the momentum and making it possible. Yeah. Yes.
Prof, again, hold that thought. We've just got to go for our final break. We're talking to the chairman of ISIS, Datuk Professor Dr. Mohd Faiz Abdullah. Stay with us. Welcome back to Money Matters. We're talking to the chairman of ISIS. Now, Prof, can we talk about the digital economy? Now, what steps is Malaysia taking to position itself as a leader in the digital economy, and how does WEF contribute to this vision?
Yeah, as you know, the Prime Minister himself, there's always been this kind of like the association about his initials, AI and artificial intelligence. Anwar Ibrahim, artificial intelligence. But it's true. He has been really, I could say, been very gung-ho on this. That's why we have great names coming in, for this. So AI for part of the digital economy, and then of course the related things like blockchain, Internet of Things. Those things are key areas that Malaysia is not just talking about, but actually doing things about it. So that would showcase that we are really in the forefront to advance the digital economy. Now, what happens is that it cannot be done in isolation. So that is part of the ASEAN agenda for 2025. As you know, there would be some disparity, inequality in terms of the rate of advancement for digital transformation. You have the less developed ASEAN member states, and then you have the more developed ASEAN member states, and we know who they are. So there must be effort to be inclusive, hence the term inclusivity, to ensure that happens, to move it at a more, shall we say, equitable level in the advancement. At the same time, there's a problem about digital inequality. Urban, rural, and the rich and the poor. That is another key area that we are trying to advance to reduce the digital gap between the poor and the rich and those who are more fortunate. Among some of the other things I need to mention is the ASEAN Digital Economy Agreement. This is known as DEFA. That is something that is quite concrete in terms of planning, and it should be the ones that should be at the forefront in order to move the digital transformation agenda for ASEAN. And that is something that is incumbent on Malaysia as chair for 2025.
Right. Okay. Now, moving on to strengthening, you mentioned ASEAN a lot here. Yes. So strengthening the ASEAN role, how does Malaysia's participation in WEF contribute to its role within ASEAN, and what collaborative opportunities were explored at the regional level? Yeah,
in addition to what I said earlier, Malaysia made it clear that in moving the digital transformation, it would ensure that there would be more equitable participation of ASEAN member states. That is a direct contribution. At the same time, there will be matters in terms of enhancing capabilities, because you do need that intellectual infrastructure to ensure that the processes of digital transformation can be actualized and not just talked about. So the theory is one thing, the practical part is another thing. So that Malaysia is also moving towards ensuring that these things can be actually made possible, spreading across ASEAN member states, apart from the actual implementation part of it.
So, looking at post-WEF action plan, so what immediate action should Malaysia take to build on the conversations and opportunities arising from WEF to enhance its global economic standing?
Kevin, like I said, you got to get on with it, walk the talk. There's a lot of decisions being made. Now it's about coming with clear action plans, not just planning, but translating the decisions into concrete, cogent, palpable actions that will bear fruits, not just in the short run, but also in the long run.
Right. So, final question before we go. Now, there's a growing impression that WEF has sort of lost its strength in the last 20 years. And some people said this is highlighted by some global leaders not attending this year, like the British Prime Minister, French President, as well as the China President as well. So do you think that in the long run, or currently as well, WEF will still remain relevant?
Absolutely relevant. I didn't get that impression, although we do read newspapers, there will be detractors, and there will be those who are advocating it. But I can tell you for sure, being there and getting the feeling, the bust and they call it the vibes, feeling that, the bustle, not the bust, the bustle, and the vibes, you feel that the thing is very much on. Top CEOs are still there. Yeah, you have given a couple of names which are not bad. There are many other leaders who are still there, and they pull aside, and they have got their side bilaterals, they talk. The CEOs meet with other CEOs. The conversation is very, very much pertinent to what is facing the world right now in terms of climate change, in terms of energy transition, in terms of sustainability issues, and in terms also in relation to questions about gender gap, questions of differentiation in terms of between salaries and inequities in economic development. Those are all very relevant issues. As long as that goes on, I don't see how it could actually lose relevance.
Not be relevant. Professor, thank you very much for being on Money Matters. It's been a pleasure having you with us.
Thank you for having me.
For the past half an hour, you've been with us on Money Matters. If you miss any part of today's show, you can always catch it up on Tonton. I'm Zahir Kelvinong Abdullah. Thank you for watching and have a great weekend.